After years of marriage, I never thought something like this could happen to me. We had always been a good couple, or so I thought. My husband and I had always talked about how we would navigate the ups and downs of life together. But one fateful night changed everything. It started out like any other night. I had a girls' night out planned for months, just a chance to unwind, laugh, and catch up with friends. Nothing unusual, no ulterior motives, just fun. My husband was always supportive, encouraging me to spend time with my friends. He never once raised an eyebrow when I'd go out, trusting that I'd always come back to him. But that night, something shifted. I met someone. It was a random encounter, innocent at first. We were chatting, laughing, and I honestly never thought it would lead anywhere. A few drinks turned into one too many, and suddenly, the lines blurred. One kiss led to more, and before I knew it, I found myself waking up next to someone I didn't know, in a hotel room I had no memory of checking into. I was horrified, mortified. How could I let this happen? I had no excuse, but I didn't want to believe it had happened. I called my friends, trying to piece together the night, but nothing could erase the shame I felt. I immediately regretted everything, but I knew I had to face the consequences. When I came home, I braced myself for what was to come. But nothing prepared me for what my husband said. He had found out about the one-night stand. I couldn't believe it. He had all the evidence he needed. Somehow, my reckless mistake had been exposed, and the trust we'd built over the years was shattered in an instant. He told me he couldn't forgive me. He said that what I did went against everything we stood for. As much as I begged and pleaded for him to understand that it was a mistake, he couldn't. The pain in his eyes was unbearable, and he told me he was filing for divorce. He couldn't continue living in a marriage where betrayal had tainted everything. The divorce papers came through weeks later, and I was left reeling from the emotional blow. How could I have done this? How could I let one night of poor judgment destroy everything? The trauma of losing my husband, someone I thought would be by my side forever, was unbearable. The guilt consumed me. I could see it in his face. He was done. He couldn't get past it, and that was the hardest thing to accept. Now, as I sit here, picking up the pieces of my shattered life, I realize how much one moment of weakness can change everything. The nights I now spend alone feel so empty, and I don't know how to heal. My heart aches with the realization that my one mistake cost me the love I once held dear. As the weeks passed, I tried to keep myself busy, hoping the distractions would ease the pain. I threw myself into work, spent time with family, and tried to pretend that life could somehow continue on. But it didn't feel right. Everywhere I went, I felt the weight of my betrayal hanging over me like a dark cloud. People looked at me differently, as if they could see the shame on my face. The awkward silences at family gatherings, the sympathetic looks from friends, I could barely take it. I missed my husband more than I could put into words. The apartment felt empty without him, the silence of it deafening. I would replay every moment of that night over and over in my mind, wishing I could turn back time, wishing I could take back that one foolish decision. The person I was before, the woman who loved and cherished her marriage, felt like a stranger to me now. Then one evening I saw him. I was walking to my car after work when I spotted him on the street. He was standing there, talking to a friend, looking like the man I had loved for so many years. For a brief moment, I thought maybe things could go back to how they were. Maybe he would forgive me. Maybe there was still hope. But when our eyes met, the look he gave me sent a chill through my bones. There was no recognition, no warmth, just cold indifference. It was as if he had already mourned the loss of me and moved on. I knew in that moment that the damage was done. I had hurt him beyond repair. The trust that had been broken couldn't be mended. We had shared so many beautiful years together, and now I had nothing to show for it. He had every right to feel betrayed, and I couldn't blame him for wanting to leave me behind. The pain I felt was something I couldn't escape. It was a daily reminder of my own failure. A few months later, I was served with the final divorce papers. It hit me like a ton of bricks. The reality of it all became painfully clear. I was no longer his wife, no longer the woman he trusted. We were just two strangers now, bound only by the memories of what we once shared. I wanted to scream, to beg him for one more chance, but I knew deep down that he was already gone, emotionally and physically. I had to face the truth. I had lost the person who meant the world to me because of a moment of weakness, a mistake that had changed the course of my life. The betrayal, the heartache, and the guilt would follow me for years to come. I had shattered the foundation of our love, and there was no way to rebuild it. As I sat alone in the quiet of my apartment, I realized I couldn't undo the damage I had caused. There was no rewind button, no way to make everything right again. I could only hope that, one day, I would learn to forgive myself. But for now, all I could do was live with the consequences of my actions and the haunting emptiness of a love lost. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. I tried to move on, but the process felt like dragging a boulder uphill. I threw myself into self-reflection, attending therapy to understand why I had made such a reckless choice. The guilt was relentless, gnawing at me, making me question my very character. How could I have done this to the person I loved? The one who had stood by me through everything? Therapy helped me a little, but the pain of losing him, of breaking the trust we had built over so many years, was still too raw. I had moments of clarity when I could understand that my actions didn't define my entire being, but there were far too many nights where I would cry myself to sleep, haunted by the thought that I would never have the chance to make things right. One evening, as I sat at the dinner table alone, I began to write in a journal I had started after the divorce. Writing became a form of catharsis. In it, I expressed all the pain and regret I was carrying, pouring my heart onto the pages. I wrote about how foolish I had been, how much I missed my husband's smile, his laughter, his voice. I even wrote about how I wished I could apologize properly, but I knew that no words would ever undo the damage I had caused. It wasn't long after that night that I received a message from him. My heart stopped for a moment as I stared at the notification on my phone. It had been so long since we last spoke, months actually. My hands trembled as I opened the message, unsure of what to expect. It wasn't an apology or an invitation to fix things, but a simple text. "I'm doing okay. I hope you're doing well too." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Should I open up to him? Tell him how much I regret everything? Should I try to convince him that I had changed, that I was learning from my mistakes? But then I stopped myself. This wasn't the time for that. I had to respect the boundaries he had set, the space he needed. Instead, I simply replied, "Thank you. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find the happiness you deserve." That was it. The conversation ended there, and I was left with a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the resolution I had imagined or dreamed of, but it was a step in a different direction. I had accepted that I couldn't fix the past, and neither could he. But I could work on healing myself. Months continued to pass, and though the pain never fully disappeared, I started to build my life back up in small, meaningful ways. I reached out to old friends, took up new hobbies, and slowly but surely, I started to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage. I learned to be kinder to myself, acknowledging that while my mistake was irreversible, I didn't have to define my entire future by it. It wasn't easy, and it still isn't. There are days when I wish things had turned out differently, when I imagine what my life could have been if I had made a different choice. But I also realize that life isn't about perfection. It's about growth, and the lessons we learn through our struggles. I would carry the weight of my mistake forever, but I had the power to move forward. Then one day, out of the blue, I received a call. It was from him. My heart skipped a beat, and I hesitated before answering. "Hey." His voice came through the phone, tentative but warm. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I realized I don't want to hold on to all this bitterness anymore. I don't think we'll ever go back to what we were, but I wanted you to know that I've forgiven you." The words hit me like a wave, and for a moment, I could hardly speak. "Thank you," I whispered, the tears coming unbidden. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm so grateful for it." And while we both knew we would never be the same, that conversation, his forgiveness, gave me a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. We didn't have to be married for me to cherish the person I had once been with. We didn't have to go back to what was, but we could move forward with a little less pain in our hearts. It wasn't the ending I had imagined. It wasn't perfect. But for the first time since that fateful night, I felt like I could breathe again. Time continued its steady march forward, and life began to feel a little less heavy. The healing process, while far from linear, began to show small, subtle signs of progress. I found myself laughing again, genuinely enjoying moments I once took for granted, meeting friends for coffee, taking long walks on the weekends, and reconnecting with parts of myself that had been lost in the wake of my betrayal. Though I still missed my ex-husband in ways that sometimes felt unbearable, I started to understand that the healing wasn't just about reclaiming what was lost, but about learning to find peace in my own journey. His forgiveness had been a turning point, but it didn't erase the work I had to do on myself. I had to let go of the constant self-blame, to stop punishing myself for one mistake, to stop seeing myself as the sum of my worst decision. There were moments when I thought about reaching out to him again, asking if he would want to meet up, just to see how he was doing or to get closure of some kind. But each time I considered it, I remembered the boundaries he had set. The space he needed had been clear, and while we were no longer together, there was no reason to disrupt his life again. If he wanted to reach out, he would. I had to respect that. In time, I realized that closure wasn't something I needed from him, but something I needed to give myself. One day, I found myself reflecting on the past year as I stood by the window of my apartment. It had been a year since that night, a year since everything had come crashing down. And yet, here I was, standing on my own 2 feet, living a life I had rebuilt from the ashes of my mistakes. I had faced the hardest truth I would ever have to confront, that my actions had consequences that no amount of apologies could undo, but I was still here. I was still alive. And I had a future to look forward to. The trauma of that night would never completely fade, but it no longer consumed me. I had learned to forgive myself, to understand that while the pain of my past was real, it did not define my worth. I had taken ownership of my actions, and slowly, with each passing day, I was learning to live in the present, not in the shadow of what I had done. Then one day, after months of silence, I received a message that I had never expected. It was from him. "I've been seeing someone," it began. "I didn't want you to hear it from anyone else." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me wanted to reach out and ask 1,000 questions, but another part of me knew I needed to let him have his own life. After all, I had done the same. I had grown, healed, and moved forward. He deserved that too. "I'm happy for you," I responded, my fingers shaking as I typed. "You deserve to be happy." And just like that, the conversation ended. There was no anger, no bitterness, just the understanding that we had both found new paths to walk. His message didn't bring back the old pain. It simply made me realize that we were both moving forward, finding peace in our own ways. As I put my phone down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was as if a chapter had closed, not with a loud bang, but with a quiet sigh of acceptance. He was finding his happiness, and I was learning to find mine, no longer tethered to the past. I knew there would be days when the memories would resurface, when the regret would creep in, but I also knew that I had done everything I could to make things right. I had apologized, I had sought forgiveness, and I had learned from my mistakes. The future was mine to create now, with or without him. I had a life to live, and I was no longer going to let the mistakes of my past keep me from embracing the possibilities ahead. And so, as I looked out at the world beyond my window, I felt something new stirring inside me, a quiet sense of hope.